Welcome back, friends. Build a Lot Acres here. I'm Case.
And I'm Clara.
And we're here today to discuss what is the best way to store your firewood. Now, on our acreage, we've burnt wood for a lot of years, and I've personally utilized to this day multiple of these ways. And we're going to discuss some of the pros and the cons to each way, and you can make up your mind which way would best serve you. Now, the first way that you can store your firewood is a loose pile. You throw it into a loose pile, you don't stack it, you don't do anything. This might seem like a good way to go, but there's a lot of reasons that it's an awful idea. First is it takes up a lot more space than a neatly stacked pile. It requires more square footage of lawn or wherever you're going to put it, driveway. Another negative would be that it never really dries out. The bottom wood touching the ground always stays wet. It never dries out. It's going to be much more likely to absorb moisture from the ground. And the last thing I would probably say would be that it's much more likely to harbor rodents. We're going to have all these big nooks and crannies for them to go into versus a nice tightly stacked pile.
And one thing that I'd like to actually add to that is it looks a lot less nice than when you stack it.
Yeah, visually it's not as appealing as some of the other methods we're going to discuss. The next method we're going to discuss is probably the most common method that I see and that you probably see. That's going to be an open stack. Simply put, you're just going to have the firewood stacked out in the open. There's not going to be anything holding it other than maybe some cribbed ends, or maybe you have some T-posts or something to hold the ends of the stack still. But other than that, it's just basically an open air stack. There's no coverings. Now, there's a number of positive benefits to this way. It takes up less square foot than the loose thrown pile. Visually, it looks better. It looks more appealing to most people. It's going to be much quicker drying. It's not going to have issues with the ground contact that the loose pile is going to have. And it's very cost effective. It doesn't cost any money other than maybe if you have to buy a few pallets or some runners or something to put it on. I do recommend keeping it a few inches off the ground so you don't have that bottom row absorbing the moisture. So either some free wood pallets, some plastic pallets, maybe some 4x4s or logs or something as a runner to keep it off the ground.
We use wood pallets that we can get for free, and that works really well, and it's free, so that's what we use.
So some of the negatives I would say would be you're not going to get as much per square foot as you're going to with some other methods we're going to look at. You are going to get a good amount, but you're not going to get as much as you could, and you're going to have more likelihood of rain and snow getting on top of the piles if you live in a colder climate. So the wood's going to be a little less quick to dry out if it gets rained on a lot, and if you get a lot of snow, it's going to be harder to access the wood. So those would be some negatives that you might want to think about with this method. So that's going to lead us into our next method, which is very similar. It's open air stack with a covering. So basically it's the same concept, except you're going to have something covering the top. It might be some plastic sheeting or some tarps, or maybe some metal panels, plywood, or even an old, I've seen people use billboard material. It's almost like a heavy duty tarp. I've seen them use that for their coverings. Now, most of the benefits, we can go over the same thing, but it's going to be the same benefits you're going to get with the open air stacks. You're going to get good drying, you're going to get good square footage, amount of wood per square foot. It looks nice, it doesn't cost a lot, and then some of the same negatives, but some of them you're going to get rid of. You're not going to have the issues with the rain, the snow, because now you have something covering the wood. So I would say it's a step up from the open air stacks. The only negative is the top coverings can blow off a little bit sometimes, especially if you have a lightweight panel or something to that effect, and even the tarps can blow around and they can still allow some moisture through. So I would say it's definitely a better option than just an open air stack, but it's not the best option. I would caution you though, if you're going to cover your stacks, do not cover the sides. You don't want to completely encase the wood in a tarp. It's a very bad idea. It's going to cause moisture to get trapped inside. It's not going to be able to get out. You're going to have issues with the wood staying wet. It's not going to burn good. You're going to have a lot of creosote buildup. just trust me on this, it's not a good idea. If you're going to cover your wood, only cover the top. Leave the sides exposed so that the sun and wind can do their job and season the wood. So our next method is probably going to be one of my personal favorites, is a woodshed. Now, this is going to be obviously a little more expensive than using stacks, and it is going to be a fixed location. So if you decide you want to change the location of where you keep your wood, it's not very easy to do if you have a building that's already in a particular spot for the wood to be housed in. So those would be probably the two biggest negatives: the cost and the permanent location. Obviously a little time to construct the building, but that's not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. But some of the positives are the wood's permanently covered. You don't have to worry about the top blowing off. You can stack it much higher without risk of it falling over like it could in an open stack. I've seen most open stacks I've done have been between 4 and 5 feet. That's about as high as I feel you can comfortably go without it toppling over. Whereas a woodshed, you're really not limited. You can go up as high as you can reach, 7 to 8 feet sometimes. So you got more wood per square foot. It's always covered on the top. It's not affected as much by wind, snow, rain, things like that. So if a woodshed sounds like it's the right fit for you, then build a woodshed.
There are two more things that I would actually like to add to that. First being, like he said earlier, make sure that you don't cover the sides completely. For example, in our woodshed, we have like one board and then an open space about as wide as the board, and then another board, so it is open and allows the airflow to get in. And second would be that it would cost more money if you don't have a construction background than if you do. So that is something to consider, to how much you'd have to pay for someone to build it. But if you do have a construction background, like my dad here, and can build it yourself like he did, then it'll cost the materials and a little bit of your time. But other than that, it doesn't really cost much.
And we'll put some pictures up just so you can see some different ideas for how we've done our woodshed and some different ideas for you. I guess that will lead us into our next method for storing your firewood, which would be containers. It can be wood racks, it can be boxes, pallets, IBC containers, which would be an intermediate bulk container, which is like a metal cage. You've probably seen them. It's about a 4-foot approximate cube. It's a cage with a plastic bladder inside of it. It's meant to house different things, but a lot of people will take the bladders out and they'll use the cages to store firewood. I personally use these in addition to a woodshed and an open stack, actually. So I use all three methods, and I like all three of them for different reasons. I dislike all of them for different reasons. But I think some of the positives would have to be the best positive for this method would be it's much easier to move. It's much less handling. Once you split the wood, you split it off the splitter, you put it into the container, and you're done. You can let it season for a year, 2 years, whatever you want. And then when you go to burn it, you can bring it over to your house. Another positive would be that it saves time, it saves energy. As I said, you're not handling the wood as much. It sounds weird, but it's more fulfilling in a way to split into these because you have a small amount of wood, so it's an easier goal to obtain. You're only putting, these containers are going to hold maybe a quarter to a half a cord of wood, depending on how big of a machine you have to pick it up. So you're not talking a lot of wood. You're not looking at this 6 or 8 cord stack that seems endless and that you're never going to fill. So it kind of gives you a short-term goal. Once you get one filled, then you can do another one. So if you have only a half hour or an hour in the afternoon before it gets dark and you want to split some wood, it's a nice, easy target to try to obtain, filling one cage or one wood rack. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits.
He did touch on this, but as he said, it's a lot less handling. So what we do is we'll actually just pick it up with the forks on his tractor and bring it over to the house. So once he split it and put it in the container, then all you have to do is move it to the house and stack it in the basement. So if you do stack your wood in the basement. So it's definitely, like he said, a lot less handling and a lot less work to move it around quite so much.
So with every positive, there's a negative. And I would say the negative to the containers would be you do need a machine to pick them up. You need either a large tractor, maybe a forklift, a loader, or something to that effect to pick these containers up. As I said, most of them are going to be a quarter to a half a cord of wood, which can easily be 1,000 pounds if it's a cord of wood, or it could be 2,000 pounds, close to thereabouts if it's a half a cord of wood. So you need something with a big lift capacity to move these totes or cages around. So that's probably really the only negative, other than maybe they take up a little more space. I have seen them stacked too high. I think that can be a little dangerous. I personally don't do that, even though my tractor would. I only do one cage high. I use the 330-gallon IBC cages, which I'll show above in the picture.
And to keep it dry, we actually cut in half the bladder that's inside diagonally and use it that kind of like a roof on top of it. That way it keeps it dry and keeps off the rain and snow. So
that would be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th method, containers. So the last method we're going to touch on is one that some people might be familiar with, others might not. It's a term from Germany. It's called Holzhausen, which means wood house. So a traditional Holzhausen would hold 6 cords of wood. It's approximately a 10-foot diameter circle with a 10-foot peak. You might have seen them in people's yards. It looks kind of like an acorn or maybe a pine cone. It's basically a circle of wood that's stacked, and the traditional ones would have wood going vertically in the center to kind of act as a chimney. So supposedly Holzhausens are supposed to season wood a lot quicker than a regular stack. I haven't found that to be true, but I know I've seen it. I've read it a lot of times and have other people have told me that it seasons quicker. So that's kind of going to be up to you to determine. But another claimed benefit of the Holzhausen is you can get more wood per square foot than a regular stack. I think that could be true because I think the Holzhausen, due to its shape, is less likely to tip over than a square, straight, rectangle stack. So those would probably be some of the positives. Some of the negatives would be it does take longer to construct. It's not as straightforward as just stacking in a straight row. So it's going to take some trial and error. You're going to have to play with the pitch and the angle of the wood, make sure it doesn't slide or move or slip out. So it's going to take longer to construct, and it's a little harder to build. But other than that, I don't think there's really any negatives to doing one. I think it's a cool project to try. You can do different shapes. I know most people around here that I see do them, they don't do the traditional 6-cord, 10-foot housens. They typically will do something more like 6 or 7 feet, which is going to end up in a 2.5 or maybe 3 cords, which is still, if you have 2 of them, you're still going to end up with your 6 cords. But so the Holzhausen would be your last method that I've seen for storing the wood.
One more positive that I did mention earlier about a different method is I feel like the Holzhausen would look better than a normal stack just because it adds a lot of character and stuff to it because it looks like a house. So.
And I've seen people do some really cool stuff for the Holzhausens.
Yeah.
I've seen people put like wood shingles on them to kind of look like a real house, or put a little fake chimney, or maybe like inset some of the wood so it looks like a door or a window. So there's a lot of cool things you can try. A lot of people don't care that much about their wood stacks, but some people want it to look nice if it's going to be there for 2 or 3 years. So it's definitely something to consider, that it could really visually draw people in to take a look, and even you might have people stopping at your house, in front of your house in the road, and taking pictures and gawking, and so just keep that in mind. That's one of the things. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you like it, please like and subscribe, and as always, have a great day.